It's funny that you mentioned that because I had I had another topic I was going to go to, but I'm going to go to this one first because we're talking about the bloodline, and many people have been saying that this is the best story in wrestling of all time. And I got to be honest with you, there's a legitimate case to be made for that.
Hmm.
But I am curious to hear your thoughts, and I'll throw mine in too about whether I think that's true. But when you really think about where this bloodline story has gone and how well they've sustained it, how well everybody has played their roles, and even when they've kind of thrown some wrenches in it, like Sami Zayn, they weren't planning on using Sammy for very long in this, and it ends up being almost a a year with Sammy being involved in the bloodline. And then you bring in Cody Rhodes, and Cody gets involved in this mess.
Right.
Do you think that this is legitimately the best wrestling story of all time? And Dave, I'll start with you on that.
I think we talked about this a couple weeks back, and I was like, "Oh, of all time, there's so many great things." But if you really break this down, there's so many nuances to this story and different layers, and like the continuation of it. Most storylines is like, let's give it 6 months, let's give it maybe 12 months. This thing has a constant build, and like I said, it often reminds me of like Sopranos or something, where you got the inner workings of the family beef, you got the outside beef. Everybody want to take down the boss. Somebody, go and get to him, but then different characters pop up, like the Sami Zayn's. So I think in terms of storytelling overall, like from the arcs and the highs and lows, yes, it is probably the greatest thing that I've seen because it's been so drawn out, and every little nuance means something. They're not just throwing us crap.
Yeah, I think the one thing that before I can totally brand it that way, I want to see where it ends.
Well,
Took the words out of my mouth.
Because the one thing that I think we've seen happen a lot in professional wrestling is when you have these stories that sometimes the ending gets just turned into garbage. I mean, if you think about, for example, the NWO, the NWO is one of the greatest storylines of all time. Who's the third man? And Hogan turns and
yeah.
and all hell is breaking loose. But then by the end of it, it turned into we've got 19 different NWO factions, and Vince Russo's messing it up, and it was just it turned into just something that nobody wanted to watch anymore. We and there have been other ones that have gone that direction too, but some have finished well, and that's where what I am looking forward to seeing is what's the last chapter. Jose, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it could end up being possibly one of the best ever, but I think it's yet to be seen, kind of like what you said, right? How are we going to extend this or end this conversation and this whole story plot of how they've already created it leading up to it? Obviously, I got to get backed up and see how it all started to make sure to give my right opinion. But based off of what I have seen and what I talked to you about earlier, Mark, is that I'm feeling that you don't end it here. You have to find a way to continue it with Roman Reigns, with the Usos, and also try to find a way to get Cody Rhodes back in the mix. David said it earlier. Brock Lesnar might not be the guy that they're going to continue to do something with to continue a story with Cody. So I think that it's all going to hinder on how do they continue this after what already happened this past week. If you add more to it and the story continues and doesn't fall off and get boring, then it could end up being possibly, like you said, the best ever.
What do you, David, when you think of some of the best stories in wrestling, what do you think of?
I always go to like Hogan Andre. Like I felt that one. I mean, obviously I was a kid, but I felt like, oh, what's gonna happen here? Like anything that evokes emotions, right? And I think that they're doing a great job with that now. But you talk about see how this ends. Like this whole business, this whole entertainment aspect is about the journey, right? So you look at NWO, and yeah, it got ridiculous, but it's the most memorable part of wrestling that I remember, like especially as a teen and in the early 20s, whatnot. So I mean, where does it look at Sopranos, how it ended? Some people were happy that didn't say that's not the greatest show of all time, which it is,
Wow, there you go.
based on the ending. So I mean, there's so many you talk about what are some of your favorite?
It was funny. I was thinking about some of the ones that I think have been the best storylines of all time. And you start going back. I mean, I really couldn't make a fair judgment going back past like 1980.
Mm-hmm.
But you had the Bruno Sammartino, Larry Zbyszko storyline.
Jesus.
Well, you think about that. That sold out Shea Stadium.
Okay.
Hogan and Andre were on that card.
Oh, were they? And
Bruno and Larry were the main event because of Larry turning on Bruno for how popular he was. You think about like Hogan Savage, and one that I think people tend to forget about sometimes is the whole thing with MTV and WWE when you started off with Moolah and Wendy Richter and getting into that, which then led into Lou Albano and Piper, with the gold record, and Mr. T coming out of the audience, which then led to WrestleMania. And that whole thing, the interaction with MTV and Cyndi Lauper, was a huge storyline that led to the age of wrestling where it is today. You have that one, some other ones that stand out. Hogan Savage, Tully Blanchard, Magnum TA was unbelievable. And of course you had like Vince McMahon and Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Yeah, that was one of the GOATs of all time. Like that, because that was a long drawn out story. It was beautiful. That was dope.
Can I go back in a vault and give you one of my favorites?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say it's the best of all time.
Sure.
But I remember Ultimate Warrior and Papa Chango when they had their little thing going on.
Yeah.
I remember that type of stuff because I remember seeing him on the bed throwing up because supposedly he had a spell on him, and it was, I don't know, I remember that little thing that they had going on. That was one of my all-time favorites from when I was growing up watching wrestling.
You